To make the crocus flower center, you're going to need some 28 gauge gold colored copper core wire. You will need some transparent yellow rainbow seed beads and some transparent orange seed beads. You'll need your wire cutters and a ruler. Now I'm going to be using 2 bead spinners because I have 2 bead spinners. If you've only got 1 bead spinner, you can still do this. I would put the yellow in your bead spinner and then leave the orange out either on a little mat or in a little cup, because we're only going to be grabbing about 6 of these beads at a time. So it'll be a little bit faster to grab those by hand than the yellow. Just for this video demonstration, I'm going to be switching out a couple of colors here. Now this yellow bead does not show up very well on screen, so I'm going to be switching that out for pink. So whenever you see me using pink, you should be using your transparent yellow rainbow seed beads. And this gold wire also does not show up very well on screen, and I need you guys to be able to see what I'm doing with my wire. So I'm going to be switching to a darker color of wire, again, just for the video demonstration. When you're done, your little flower center should look like this one, made on gold wire with little yellow fringes and then little orange beads at the top. We are working with a very thin gauge wire, which makes it a little bit more fragile and more easily broken than the thicker wires that we're going to be using for the petals and the leaves. What I always do when I am pulling out my wire off of the spool is I just go ahead and straighten it out. This makes wire a little bit more manageable and easy to work with, and kind of helps to tame it a little bit. Now this blue wire is a little bit easier to straighten out. The gold wire that you'll be using for your stamen is a little bit more springy. Gold wire just tends to do that, I find, is that it just tends to be a little bit more unruly. So it might take a little bit more effort to try to straighten it out. And you'll probably also need to re-straighten it more times while you're working with that gold wire. Okay, now the pattern says that we need about 10 inches of wire cut off the spool. I always recommend cutting extra wire. One, you might use a little bit more than the designer, so I'm going to go a little bit past there. But also, especially with these little fringes, sometimes, especially if you're new to fringing and you haven't done this technique before, or French beading in general, sometimes these little ends of your wires, as you're weaving up and down through the beads, get kind of kinked up and messed up, and sometimes you might need to cut those off so that you can pass through the beads. So it's always best to just have a little bit of extra wire on hand, just so you have a little bit of wiggle room. We're making the pistil first, so we're going to string 12 yellow beads. Oops. Onto the end of our wire, so I'll count out 12 there. And then I'm just going to make a little knot right in the end of my wire to hold those beads on. I'm just going to loop the wire around on itself twice there to make a little loopy knot. And I'm just going to let those little yellow pink beads kind of hang out there at the end of my wire. Now we're going to make these little loop fringes right at the top of our pistil. And we need 6 orange beads for each of the loop fringes. So I'm going to count out 6 of these little orange beads. And I'm going to scoot them down to about 2 inches from the end of my wire. So I'm about, maybe, well, actually it's closer to 3. About 3 inches there from the end of my wire. I'm going to straighten out the long end of my wire because I need it to be nice and tamed before I do what I'm about to do. I'm going to loop the wire back towards my work so I can easily control it. And with these little orange beads, I'm going to skip those first 5 orange beads. And I'm going to take the wire back down this direction through this last orange bead. I'll hold that little orange bead in place, put my wire through, and then I'm going to pull it all the way through. And so those 5 little orange beads that we skipped are going to turn into a loop right at the top of that single bead. Now if your little loop fringe moves too far away from the end, I'm actually going to bring it a little bit closer. You can just grab this little bead right at the tip, kind of pull down on the working end of your wire, move it down, and then retighten it a little bit further down. Okay, now I'm going to do that 2 more times. I need 3 total of these little orange little loops. So I'm going to string on 6 more of the orange beads. And this one I need to be directly beside the previous little loop. So I'm going to hold that fairly tight, not too tight. I don't want to break my wire. I don't want to squeeze it too tightly there, kind of like a loose tension. And again, I'm going to skip these last 5 beads. And I want to try and hold this little single bead down at the bottom in place right next to that previous loop. Because I don't really want any wire to end up between my little loops here. So I'm going to pinch and hold that bead together along with that first loop between my thumb and forefinger, and I'm going to pull this wire through. Now, as I'm pulling my wire through, do you see what's happening here with my little wire loop? That's going to turn into a kink, so I'm going to stop immediately and fix it before I continue. Keep an eye on your wire that you're pulling through as you pull the wire through. All right, so there's the second one, and now I need to make the third one. So I'm going to string another 6 orange beads onto the working end of my wire. And again, we're going to do that same thing. Now this time I'm going to intentionally show you what happens if you do end up with a little bit of space between those little fringes. So let's say, oh, I didn't leave a space. Okay. Let's say you make your little loop fringe and it ends up a little bit too far away from the previous one. What you can do is you can grab this little bead that's right in the middle of the loop and then tug down on your working end of the wire to tighten that up. And it should help to move those little beads closer to the previous loop. Now we're done with these little loop fringes that are going to be right at the top of our pistil. And now we're going to take the working end of our wire back down through these pink beads. And we need to make sure that we're going this direction towards the starting tail wire, towards the end of the starting tail wire, not this way. Okay, so make sure you're going the right direction through your beads. You'll want to kind of straighten out the end of your wire first. And I'm going to kind of push up on my beads so that I can make a little bit more space in inside my wire. If I push up there, it kind of pushes the wire down to the bottom. That gives me a little bit more space to get my wire through my beads. I'm going to go all the way through to the bottom. And then I'm going to pull that working end of my wire all the way through. I'm going to watch this little loop here, make sure it's not going to form a kink. And then once they're kind of even, I can just kind of push those pink beads up directly below those orange beads. I'm going to move my little wire off to the side here because that's going to prevent those beads from slipping down. And we can't just leave it like this. We want them to form a little bit more of kind of like a little triangular cup shape at the top of that fringe. Right? Okay, now we're going to be making 3 of the little stamen. These are going to be using just a regular wire back fringe, and they need 14 beads each. So I'm going to string 14 of my yellow beads. I am going to position this first little stamen at kind of a 90-degree angle away from my pistil. That's just going to help me to get my little fringes fairly close together. And again, I don't want to push too tightly on this. I do want a little bit of slack there so that when I push them back up together beside each other, it doesn't over tighten that wire and snap. So close together, but don't push too hard. Straighten out the long end of my wire and loop back towards my work. This time I'm just going to skip the 1 bead at the top there and then take my wire down through the 13 beads at the bottom. I need to go all the way through those 13 beads. And then I'm going to grab and hold that new fringe together with the little pistil. Try and hold those together. That hopefully will make it so you don't end up with a gap so they don't slide apart. You can fix it if you do, but it's easier if you try to prevent a gap from forming in the first place. So I'm going to pull my wire through, watch my wire the whole way I go through. And when I pull my wire through, I want to make sure that I'm going straight down through the beads, not pulling at an angle. That's going to put a little bit more strain on your wire and make it more likely to break as it rubs against the inside of those beads at an angle. So pull straight down through your beads. All right, so there is my first stamen, and I need 2 more just like it. Again, I'm going to straighten out the long end of my wire. And I'm going to string 14 more beads for the next fringe. Slide those down at a 90-degree angle away from that little first stamen. I'm going to try and pinch and hold tension on those beads so they don't swiggle around. Skip that first bead, pushing up with my finger to make more space inside the beads, and push the wire all the way down. Grab and hold to pinch and hold those fringes together, and then pull the wire straight down through the fringe. Now, if you do end up with too much space between your fringes, you can do the same thing that we did with the loop. You'll just grab that top bead, again, turn it at a 90-degree angle so that your wire is going straight up and straight down, and then tug again on that working wire straight down, and that should help to kind of tug those a little bit closer together. All right, I need one more of these fringes. 14 more beads. I'm going to show you another way you can do this. If you're having a hard time getting your wire all the way down through these beads, what you can do instead, okay, so I'm going to straighten out the long end of my wire, fold it down on itself, push that bead that we're skipping, that's going to be right at the top of the fringe, up and out of the way, and then place the end of your wire against the wire that's right above the beads. So you're kind of pinching two lengths of wire there. And then you can slide the beads onto the doubled wire. And then your little end, you want to push them up far enough so that the little end pops out. You can pull that down a little bit. And then before you tighten it, you want to make sure you pull your end of your wire down past the previous fringe so that we can push these little fringe beads down beside that previous fringe, and then pinch and hold. I'm going to open that up a little bit so I don't get a kink. And then tug on the end again. Again, straight through the beads. Alright, so there I have all of my little finished fringes. I can clip off that, and I can clip off that little loop that I made right at the beginning. Now we need to close this so that the pistil ends up right in the center of the little fringes. So I'm going to try and just kind of move the little pistil over, kind of folding the unit on itself here. I'm going to arrange these little pistils so they're kind of surrounding, or sorry, the little stamen, so they're surrounding the little pistil. And then I'm going to take the working end of my wire. It's the one that's a little bit longer. It should be sticking out of the last stamen that you made. And I'm going to wrap it around the first stamen. So I'm going to be skipping over the pistil, going around it, and then wrapping around the first pistil there. Try and make sure that you don't get down between some beads and your little fringe. Down around just the bottom of that first little stamen fringe. And that should help to hold the little stamens in a circle around the pistil. After the end, we're going to twist our wires together just a few times there, right below the unit. All right, so there is the finished flower center. When yours is done, it should look like this. You're going to need to make one of these for each flower that you are including in your little pot or your arrangement.